like it, because doesn't it actually physically have to be sourced from more than one location to create it? I know nothing about how holograms actually work, but it just struck me. It seems that everyone I know is using this as a metaphor now.
I feel exactly the same way. I love it. Daniel, if you know much about holograms, I would love to hear about some detail about holograms, because I love it, but I feel like my precision is.
Well, I don't secretly have some sort of weird obsessive compulsive need to investigate holograms, but from what I know of it, they are pretty cool. So what I understand a hologram, based on my love of Bergson and different things, and Dr. Stephen Robbins talks about this on Hologram, about this, and his work on Bergson is legendary. So apparently a hologram is a phenomenon where any point contains all of the information of the whole. So that's kind of, in metaphysics, will be an idea of hologram. So if you have one piece, you have all the information. So wherever you look at it, it's never missing anything. It's very interesting. So you know how we have the whole part distinction, the parts of a tree and then a tree, right? What's interesting about a hologram is that the branch is the tree and the tree is the branches, and all the parts contain the whole of all the parts. So every one is a gestalt, to use that fancy German term. Now, hologram I think, is growing in prominence because there's good reason to think that the universe probably has some sort of holographic principle to it. It's the only way you overcome a lot of these paradoxes and contradictions, like, the ship of Theseus, or am I mind-body dualism, all these different things, right? Well, if you can say, well, everything is that of which contains all of the information of the whole and all of its parts at the same time, well, then these distinctions kind of go away, right? There are no wholes and parts. There are things that are always participating in a whole, and every whole consists of a bunch of units that all are, right? And I think, basically for Bergson, not that I will get his understanding of space and time and metaphysics and all that correct, but it's kind of like the idea that the only way we can really understand, he talked a lot about Zeno's paradoxes, right? That idea of, if you want to get to a point, don't you have to get to a halfway point and a halfway point and a halfway point? So then you never get there, right? There are all these famous paradoxes. Well, you overcome all of those with a holographic universe, because there is no halfway. Every halfway point contains all of the information of the whole, so you overcome that problem. You also have the idea of where is the past? So time, you have past, present, future. And I'm not, there's also the hologram at the arcades that, we did with Laser Challenge. So that's another form of hologram. But then this Bergson version of hologram is interesting. So you also have this problem of, past, present, future. So where is time? Where is the past? Where is the future, right? There's always that kind of weird idea that, does the past exist right now, right? Well, in one way we say no, but so the past is in the present, and the present actually is in the past.
Daniel's very frozen.
Your hologram's not working correctly.
No, it is not. Let me see if I can do something.
We'll just go with it.
Yeah, there's these problems of time. Where is the past? And if every moment of time contains all other moments of time, that would start to make sense. And also, it starts to make sense of how we seem to exist as human beings. We don't exist in just now. We are also, as I am now, I'm associating with the last time my Zoom connection was bad, or I'm having a memory of something that happened with 5. Our experience of reality is it has all of these things happening at once. We don't experience ourselves as just the present. We experience ourselves as past all of these things, right? And so, there's that issue of time. The other reason the holographic idea is very useful is because there's also this question of, when I'm looking at this bookcase, is this bookcase, because it's the idea of, where is the mental image? And this is big for Dr. Robinson. Where is the location of a mental image? If I look at that bookshelf, is that bookshelf in my head, or is it right there in the world, right? Because if you say, because it's weird, right? Because if the brain is here and the brain experiences everything, isn't there a sense where the mental image is in my head? But then, of course, how is that possible? Because if I look in my head, I'm not going to see any neuron of a bookcase, right? So what Robinson with Bergson suggests is that, well, the bookcase is literally there, but since every point of time space, and Bergson would be more time space than space time, since every moment of time space contains the information of the whole, it is possible for the bookcase to be there, yet a mental image of the bookcase to also be here, and yet they both be part of the same whole at the same time, which is an odd idea, but basically it's the problem of extension. Like Descartes and all of these people will talk about extension, right? Like, how does the mind extend into the world, right? Because it would seem as if it must be, seeing as we know that that's not identical with my mental image. It's, you know, composed of different things. The color scheme is different for mantis shrimp versus humans. You know, bats have echolocation. So we know that reality is subjectively mediated by the particular calibrations of the brain. And yet it also seems really odd to say that the bookcase is in my head, right? So how do you deal with this problem of the bookcase hopefully not being in my head, just in my head, because then it would be like a virtual reality. And yet we also know that the bookcase is subjectively mediated, right? Well, the way that it kind of works if we talk about a hologram is that, again, to maybe word it again in a better way, the bookcase, the entire information for the bookcase is contained in the points of my mind and external from it at the same time. And the way that it is mediated to me is that is possible because every point of reality contains the information of the whole, simply relative to how I attune for it. So actually, it goes very well as I'm speaking with the antenna that we've talked about, right? In the field, right? So based on, it's like the radio waves are all there at the same time. Let's put it that way. All of the information is always present at the same time. And based on the tuning, you will get a different image, right? But that doesn't mean that the information is lacking that you don't tune into. Like when you're turning the radio, all the radio waves are there. You simply tune into some versus others. But that's not because you're removing radio waves. You're simply tuning differently, right? So the reason why your mind can tune to different subjective experiences is because at all points, the information for every possible subjective experience is there, like radio waves, but you tune differently based on your conditioning and yourself. And please ask any questions because, you know, it is. It goes to what we've been saying about the antenna. I think Bergson would be perfectly fine with that, and Dr. Robinson as well. And so it helps deal with the problem. So the holographic theory, metaphysics, which I have a lot, I really do like, it helps us deal with the problem of time. It helps us deal with the problem of extension, the extension of the mental image. It also helps us deal with fields. Like when I talk with human beings, we seem to not just be reserved to our point, right? We seem to be occupying a field, as we talked about. Well, that's possible if indeed every point contains the information for all the other points, because we can, in fact, intersect as a field, because we're not necessarily isolated in a single moment, because we all, in occupying any point of time space, actually have the ability to intersect as a whole unit that is talking not just an isolated Daniel or an isolated Seth or an isolated Aspasia. We actually do occupy, in occupying any point of space, of any point of reality, we occupy an intersecting point of reality, which is the sum of our interactions. So the holographic universe also helps us think why it is when humans interact, we feel like feels. Like you can feel what they're feeling, you can sense them, empathy, you can attune with them, like we talked about that last time. How is that possible? What must the nature of reality be like for that to be possible? Well, probably holographic. And also, if it's holographic, that's also going to be why we can have, you know, the spheres, why we can go from algebra to geometry, because it contains the ability to gather new dimensions at any point of reality that's algebraic, contains the information needed for geometric development as well, because every point contains all of the possible information of all of the points, and that would include geometric development, like additional geometry. Let's put it this way. And then I'll stop and any questions on anything. So this is what I think about when we think about holograms. another way, and I hope I'm not glitching out. I could be glitching out for 20 minutes straight and have no idea.
We can hear you perfectly fine, but you barely ever move.
Okay.
Your face barely
We've
ever
already
moves.
made the video thumbnail.
That's right. There's been so much fun.
This is hilarious. You know, it's really bad because on my side, it isn't a glitchy thing, right? You look all smooth and stuff because my computer, but for y'all, he's like Reboot, like that animated show that came on Toonami or whatever.
You were just dropping profound knowledge for like a long time while you were going.
That was so good.
That's fantastic. Oh yeah.
It was like flow though. It was just coming right out of you. It's just that you were holding that position. It was like a representation. I don't know how you made the hologram actually do that.
It was perfect. And look, now you're working again. There's some sort of alignment here. Like it was.
I unfroze him.
Every moment.
Oh, I see. You
unfroze. See the field extended. Oh, it's perfect. Every point contains all the information. That's delightful.
You're back to normal now.
Yes, and
back to normal.
That's really funny. It's perfect.
See, we
so it's perfect because the hologram.
Yeah. Oh.
That's really funny. So yeah, the last way I'd put it, in a holographic universe, any point contains the whole. So first dimension. Let's say some people in string theory, which I don't follow, but they talk about like first, second, third, fourth, up to 11 dimensions possibly. A holographic universe would mean any point of even the first dimension would contain the 11th dimension. Like every point of any dimension actually entails the information needed for all the other points. It's just that one's directionality is such where you do not realize it. So a point would contain a line would contain a plane would contain a sphere, like everything would contain everything. So that's what's very interesting about a holographic theory, which seems to frankly be what reality is more like. Like it seems more holographic than, halfway points to halfway points in the Xenos say. It seems more like fields than it is stagnant things, et cetera, so forth. So, this is what comes to mind when I think the hologram. And again, it just takes me to Bergson.
What was interesting about that is I was thinking, okay, I'm never going to go check any of this, try to verify any of this, right? Because it's just probably not the first book I'd pick up off the shelf. But also in terms of, the kind of stuff I do around movement. Well, it would be logical, go study anatomy and do, but present moment experience is always just phenomenology. And what I notice is when Daniel's explaining all that, what I'm really doing is testing if his words feel like what I'm experiencing. And like the more you talk about it, like you said, I mean, the theorists can argue, but really when it comes down to it, if I read the book that you're referring to and I just go, yeah, this is how it feels, that's helpful. It actually helps tune my frequency a little bit more. I mean, I think a lot of what we're doing in this day and age, whether we're, trying to prepare a birthday party at Sam's Club or we're trying to describe a hologram, it's like we're often working off a theory, except when I think we become really present, if we still use philosophical language, then we just go phenomenological, right? And then maybe, the car breaks down on the side of the road and then we reference theory for a minute, but then even just for a minute, and then we're like dealing, again. But I like what you're talking about also for, I mean, I couldn't have said any of what you just explained about holograms, but something that's similar, and I'm just thinking in terms of metaphorically, is like a constellation, right? So there's 1,000 stars, but where would be the one point in the middle of them, right? And then if it was only 100 stars, it'd be a point, but there's something like the more stars that you put, the more specificity you put on that point. And so it strikes me that like in my present moment phenomenology, I might have a theory in my head. I might be, if English wasn't my first language, I'd be struggling a little bit more right now. I have my body, I have, whether I fed myself today or not, all of those things. And that's like a constellation of me. But then there's 3 of us. and we're trying to constellate. And so if we were to actually find, what Vervaeke would call dialogos in this conversation, that would be another way to think about authentic resonance, like a collective authentic resonance. And it's not necessarily because, it's just that if I went back and just said it as theory and didn't try to feel it, like theoretically, there would be some resonance that would be the sweet spot for the 3 different frequencies that we bring into the Zoom call, right? It's somewhere in space. And if we just all found that one space and we were all directed at that space, it's like something would just be happening. And it wouldn't matter if it would be the same for any group of people, right? Now, how does that help me? It doesn't necessarily help me. It's just a theory. When I talk to you, I have to listen. I have to try to say something coherent. But it's like, I could almost imagine that's what I'm doing as I'm just here, following the course of what people are saying and sharing what comes up. So.
Yeah. I've been thinking sort of about the difference between, if there is a difference, between, I guess, this authentic resonance idea kind of at its inception as being something more around my kind of clarity, my sense of access to what is it? What's happening inside me, what I might want to do, like what this moment's calling for, kind of getting rid of some of the distortion that goes on in my own internal kind of experience around that. And then also how that obviously plays out, like you're talking about, Seth, here, like when there's 3 people together and we are trying to resonate together. And I guess one is always in relationship to the other. It's sort of, my ability to be able to sort of meet with you two and find that sweet spot, find that resonance, will depend on my own ability as well to have some sense of inner, I don't really like putting these terms on it, but I will, inner authentic resonance. How much am I, how much clarity are there in my inner goings on at the moment, that I am able to allow or have access to what is coming up in me, but then also be meeting it, obviously, in this relational context. So it's almost like a relational resonance and an authentic, I don't know, I'm just slapping new words on it, but like an authentic resonance and a relational resonance, you can't really break the 2 things apart, perhaps. Yeah, so I don't really know if that adds anything particularly helpful, but I have been pondering on that. Yeah, please, Daniel, jump in. You look alive.
Well, a few things, not to jump, and if I freeze again, we'll see. We'll do a hologram effect. So there's a few things that's very interesting. Like first on what you're saying, Seth. So Bergson, funny enough, as you could argue difficult as a thinker as he is, he's actually defending common sense, oddly. Like he's actually, he had these famous debates with Einstein, which, Dr. Segal talks about this debate as well with Whitehead and different things. And, Einstein presents a universe where there's no free will, determinism is the case, time is basically an illusion because it's relative to space and things like that. And Bergson, without getting into the debate, because I think Whitehead basically says that Einstein, not that I am saying this correctly, there is a certain assumption of the curvature of space-time that is in special relativity that Whitehead questions. And he says, I don't know if where you get that assumption from. Now, that may be completely wrong what I just said, but there is something that Whitehead saw in Einstein's work that he thought was a problem. And I think many people today are increasingly suggesting there is. Whitehead is, yes, he is, absolutely. And he's a super genius. And he saw something there
we're
that I think.
Resonance. I'll just say, Daniel, because when you were talking about, you were explaining the hologram earlier, I was thinking there's something about this that sounds like Whitehead. But then I questioned myself and said, I don't know enough about Whitehead. I won't say that. So
no, it is definitely Whitehead. The Bergson, no, exactly right. I think this is an age of the thinkers like Bergson and Whitehead that really were passed over And Dr. Segal talks about them, and I think he's correct on them. Dr. Hamelrick. I mean, we have a return to the science of logic. It's an interesting time, but what we see when Bergson is debating with Einstein, there's this sort of way where Bergson is trying to actually defend how we experience reality, because he's basically like, we don't experience reality anything like Einstein describes the universe, right? He's trying to defend freedom. He's trying to defend the fact that time is real to us, that time is more real to us in experience than space. We experience ourself undergoing time more than stagnant space that is kind of a block that doesn't change. We experience movement. We experience these things. And Bergson is kind of like, you know, if you're going to be putting forth a theory that is saying all of that is fake, it really must be very strong. It must be very powerful. And the way that someone like the great Stuart Kaufman would put it, and I don't want to go too much further in cosmology or different things, although it's fascinating, there is a Jim Rutt conversation with Stuart Kaufman. Any Stuart Kaufman conversation with Jim Rutt, and in general, should be listened to, because Stuart Kaufman is unbelievable. But basically, as I understand it, Stuart Kaufman wants to say that special relativity is a description within locality, but we cannot assume locality is fundamental, because non-locality could be fundamental. Now, what that means is non-locality is basically quantum entanglement, where, you know, you have a particle move on the other side of the universe and it also moves. So the idea of locality means within the speed of light, okay? So within the speed of light special relativity seems to work great, okay? It's useful, right? Just like we always have to remember, Einstein, in a sense, overturned Newton, but we still mostly use Newton. This doesn't mean Newton is wrong or not useful. In fact, most of our work is still basically just Newton. It's that it doesn't describe everything, right? Well, likewise, that's probably the case with Einstein. It describes a lot of things within locality, but it doesn't describe necessarily everything that exists. And you see, honestly, what Kaufman points out, I'll just make this example and then bring it back to the holographic universe. Like right now, we're probably seeing a paradigm shift occur in cosmology, because there's too many anomalies that cannot be explained by the models that are presented. So here's one example. There are these things called impossible universes now, which are universes that are very large, but they're very large on the edge, like far away. They're way too big. Like the further out you go, you should have smaller universes, because there's been less time for them to grow, okay? So the further out into the universe you go, the smaller galaxies should be. Well, guess what? We're going far out into the universe and finding very large galaxies. This doesn't make any sense. This should not occur. And then there's obviously things like quantum entanglement and et cetera. So, and of course, you know, dark matter, like the majority, you know, dark matter is a very problematic concept, and it has to make up a very huge percentage of everything in the universe, but no one's seen dark matter. It's more of a mathematical, hypothetical necessary to make the models work, right? So anyway, someone like Stuart Kaufman comes along and says, okay, well, Einstein might describe within locality, but what if, and I think Stuart Kaufman probably is our best bet at what's going on. What if non-locality is fundamental? What if quantum entanglement is fundamental per se, and locality after non-locality versus so locality is emergent from non-locality, versus locality and non-locality exists dualistically, or non-locality within locality. So what if entanglement is actually most fundamental versus the speed of light? Well, guess what? Well, if that's the case, what does entanglement sound like? The hologram. Like if you have things that beyond the speed of light are actually relating with one another quicker than the speed of light, well, that sounds like every point contains all the information of every other point, and that something can move way over here and have an effect of something way over here, and that everything actually is much more tangled up per se, which would basically mean that things can relate with one another simultaneous. That's crazy, like, you know, but that's a holographic universe. And that's also, but you see, here's the funny thing. Isn't that kind of what you experience? You kind of experience reality occurring more simultaneous than anything. You say, well, that's because it's at the speed of light. It's really, really quick. Okay, that's sure. But the felt experience of reality has a certain simultaneousness to it, right? Like when I look at the bookcase, I simultaneously experience it within myself and there at the same time. When I'm having a conversation with y'all, I'm simultaneously myself and y'all at the same time. I'm a point, but also a field. There's a certain bothness that is perpetually occurring in reality. And what's so funny is this for Bergson is a defense of common sense. You say, this doesn't sound like common sense at all. He's like, no, this is actually common sense. This is what, if you were to ask a child, what is reality like? They will actually more naturally describe it like what we're saying until we come along and say, no, Einstein found out that time is relative and we're just atoms. And Bergson's basically like, you have to correct the child. Like, think about that. We have to correct people. Our natural experience of reality is more like Seth is saying, and then we educate people out of that. And Bergson's like this, and basically what Bergson is saying, and Whitehead, and I think, and well, Segal and points this out, and we talked about Barfield. Basically, they're all saying, if you go down this path, humans will be miserable. You will ruin you will ruin human beings if you take them down this path. And hasn't it? I mean, it's not, I think it's pretty easy to say that what people call the meaning crisis kind of follows from block universe, determinism, there's no freedom, we're all atomized points. Everyone's talking about reductionism. Bergson maybe was like, hey, Whitehead was like, hey, this is not going to go well. They all saw this physical image, this image of physics leading to nihilism in different things, right? So it's really funny because the holographic universe is a defense of common sense. It's so funny. I always find it so interesting is that it's this kind of radically, well, creative is a Whiteheadian word. It's this very fascinating metaphysics and ontology that sounds very, very heady. And in a way, of course, it is very heady. But then what's so funny is at the same time, it actually is very common sense. It is very concrete. But also the best, in my opinion, those tend to be actually the best theories. They have this principle of simultaneity, where they're both very complex and simple at the same time. A theory that isn't like that, in my opinion, both something radically simple, but a simplicity that can unfold into a great complexity, one should be suspect of. And the reason why is because if the universe is in fact a holographic universe, then a good theory would be one that is analogous to a hologram, meaning it should all be compactable in a single point, a simple non-composite point, and then unfold, right? So a good theory is quote unquote actual, right? Like it actually describes reality, right? Okay, well, if reality is holographic, then a good theory is going to have this interesting, very simple single point, what does the body say, that can then be unfolded into a cosmology, and that cosmology can come back to a point. If not, then it would not match the form of reality as hologram, and so there would be reason to suspect it. Now, you could say that's circular reasoning, but it's only, but you see, then it becomes, what are you appealing to? You're always in the hermeneutical circle, right? This is also the issue. Like Heidegger and all of them is like, well, you're always in a circular reason because you're stuck in an interpretive circle, right? So here's the question. What cosmology would align with a ever circular principle where a point is going to justify itself? A holographic universe. Like a holographic universe would be one that comes back to its original point in its discussion because every point contains all the other points, right? Like a hermeneutic circle, if reality really was something that you could kind of break apart or go from point A to point B to point C, you could perhaps not have a circular reason. But you see a circular reason, it actually comes to a point and then it opens up and it contains a hole and it comes down and it's more like a cone sort of structure, right? So we should expect this if we actually think that the holographic universe, and I'm now freezing again, I think, but I hopefully not. But we should expect this point to a whole because that is in fact a holographic structure, right? So I think also too, like it's just your cosmology should also be isomorphic to your hermeneutic situation. It should be like the problem of interpretation. It should be like common sense. Like it should all have the same formal structure in how it is if it all aligns with actuality, right? And so I think the closest the best model for that, in my opinion, is the holographic universe. I'm happy to explain any of that. And I think a constellation goes really well with that as well. And also, before I forget to what you were saying, Aspasia, this also, it's very interesting because when you enter into a conversation, You're often looking for the point that makes you whole. Like you find a point and then you're a whole unit. You suddenly enter into a dialogos. You find this point that, where are all the antenna? Like when you start a conversation, everyone's an antenna per se, and you're looking for the point that is the radio signal that then everyone is in, and now you're a whole. Bam, suddenly you're a whole now, right? But when you enter a conversation, you're looking for that point. Like you feel, oh, there's a point, and now we have a whole, right? Well, again, that's a holographic structure. Like good conversations find a point, and then bam, a whole appears, because that point is the one that all 3 or 4 or however many people are attuned to as a radio signal per se. And now the hologram can unfold into a whole. And so we also, the very way good conversation goes is what we would expect it to be like if the universe was in fact holographic, right? And also things like the whole body knows, that is something we would expect to be true in a holographic universe, because the body actually is able to contain the information of the whole that you can access if you rightly tune your radio signal, right? If you rightly attune yourself, then you can access that whole. And the problem is, if you only use your brain, if every point contains the whole, the probability that only your brain consists of the material needed to tune the radio antenna at all points of reality is very low. Sometimes it might be, but there are other times where you need the whole body to attune your radio signal. And if that's off limits, you're not going to do it, right? So you have to bring the whole thing into picture. So point whole. So that was another thing.
Yeah, and I really think emotions are like the hook as well. Like they're in the body, and that they are so holographic in this sense. There is just this is actually part of the struggle that people have with certain emotions, is that they don't want to feel them. They purposely try not to feel them, because in an instant they bring with them this entire history, this entire memory bed of every time they've ever felt that emotion. Like, it brings it's hard to, it's very confronting. It's hard to avoid the holographic nature, I guess, as we're talking about, to really connect without too much distortion to emotions in the body. But this is making me think, and maybe I'm getting this wrong, but this is making me think that essentially, like, so authentic resonance, relational resonance, whatever we're talking about, really it sounds to me like it's allowing, it's actually purposely trying to swipe aside and push aside all this other whatever the counterpoint to the holographic stances. I don't know what you'd call it, but we're trying to like wipe that sort of those ideas aside, all the stuff we've been taught and had layered on top, like removing that from our sense making for a moment. And that is actually part of maybe what we're connecting to. It's kind of the recognition of the holographic nature, and the more that we are able to perhaps wipe that other stuff aside, then we are more likely to be able to authentically resonate, relationally resonate. Is this making sense? I'm not using the best words, but
I not to jump in, but I'll say it very quick. The opposite you could call the block universe. That's how some people call Einstein.
Right.
It's not by chance that under the Einsteinian cosmology, emotions are fake. Things are not real. Everything is relative. There's this sort of like in the Einsteinian cosmology, a lot of things don't exist. Basically, they're not real. They're basically illusions, right? Well, in a holographic universe, it's not that emotions don't real. There's a certain attunement. The language is more attunement, right? Because another way to put this is, if every point contains the whole, that also means it's possible to be toward the whole as if it's a point. So it goes both ways, right? And here's the problem. When you disregard your emotions or you disregard your body, you can make reality go the other way versus the full way, right? Because you can shrink it. Like, another way to put this is, if I've got this whole room here, then it's possible for me to squint my eyes and see it in a less vibrancy than it is. Or I could cover this eye, right, and have a different experience, right? But the only reason I'm able to lessen my experience of the room is because the whole thing is there, right? So let's say, I don't know how, if the room was lacking color, I couldn't just bring color into existence. But if it has color, I could put on maybe black and white sunglasses or something and then make the color go away, right? So from the whole, you can go down, but from the down, you can't go up. You understand what I'm saying,
Yes.
right? So what ends up happening is in Einstein, if everything fundamental is space, then anything above space must simply be relative. It must be a relative experience that's more illusionary. Time isn't really there, right? It's all more just atoms that are creating an effect of higher dimensionality, but that higher dimensionality is ultimately not real, okay? So what Bergson comes along and says, no, the whole is there. If you experience less than the whole, it's because you're toward it in a way that makes it seem that way. You've put on black and white sunglasses, or you squinted your eyes, or maybe you closed your eyes, right? So if you have the whole, you can choose to not use the fullness of your faculties and thus experience it as lesser, okay? So when you don't use your body or you don't use your emotions, there is a fullness to the room you therefore now cannot experience. If that makes sense. So what ends up happening is in an Einsteinian conception, there's no reason to think that coming to learn your emotions or learning your body would add to reality, because all it would do is add impressions and subjective relative experiences, but nothing real, right? In a Bergsonian world, no. If you can use higher faculties, you add more reality. Bergson has it be more reality that's actually there that you're adding, where in a block universe, you're not really adding anything because it's all just relative. It's all just a subjective filtration that is occurring that is more like an illusion. So there are some real stakes here. When you start moving toward a Bergsonian conception, then all of this stuff is actually getting you more attuned with reality. It is not just about feeling better, because let's put it this way, and I'll stop. In an Einsteinian conception, all this talk on authentic resonance or geometry or all the stuff we've talked about, maybe it makes you feel better, but it doesn't have you're not gaining reality. You're just feeling better.
Mm-hmm.
In Bergson, you're literally gaining reality. You're gaining more actuality when you gain authentic resonance or you use the whole body. This is not just feeling better in a lame therapeutic sense. It's literally giving you access to actuality.
Yes.
And this is a classical idea that the good is gaining actuality, and you get more beauty, right? So this is why, and it's just another example. To me, it's another example where stuff that doesn't seem like it has an effect on other things does. Who knew that physics has an impact on therapy or thinking mental health or emotions or different things? No, it absolutely does. Because it determines what's real. So it all connects. So anyway, those are thoughts. Please.
It's so real. It's so real. And then I'll shut up in a second, Seth, and let you talk. But it's so that was really, really helpful. Daniel, you kind of just took my clumsy words and now I understand what I was trying to say much clearer. Thank you. What was I going to say? Oh, the point I just want to throw in though is that I agree with that. But so many people don't want more reality. That is the illusion is good for them. That's kind of where they're at. This idea that because it's narrower, it's more compressed, they can make better sense of it. They feel like anyway, they can make better sense of it. And it's this desire for control and this need for clear predictability. And I just think that the really difficult part in all of this is it's just people that are strapped into the illusion and desperately want to remain there, maybe on some level. It's too.
You're bringing to mind this movie from a few years ago, Don't Look Up.
Oh, I never saw it. Yeah, but I know it.
Well, the comet is coming to the Earth, and then there's like
I did see it.
a polarization around whether it's true or not. And half the world is then they have a banner like "Don't look up," right? But if you're living your life in such a way that you're like this, it's like, I want to believe the narrative. Stop bothering me, But it really is this contracted place where even just contracted in terms of perception, I just can't fully see. But why do I refuse to look up, even though there might in fact be, an asteroid coming? It's because I don't want to face reality, right? And I mean, this I think becomes very much the conversation that you're having with your clients as well, Aspasia. It's like, this is where it's funny. I mean, I kind of thought when we started, oh, well, we're going into all of this stuff. What is this? But it's really, I'm noticing how useful it is to think of almost like spatial, your spatial phenomenological experience and how that relates to something like emotion or something like how I understand metaphysics, or as Daniel pointed out, how I orient with my so-called common sense just to, get to the store and like, do my errands. So there was something that earlier I just had this image. We were sort of talking about the different ways that I try to tune in to a situation, and that at a certain point I might sort of release some of that control, right? Maybe it's just relaxing, maybe it's trusting. But I could be in a conversation at a certain point, or it could be as practical as, I think, I'll just listen. But it's like I'm trusting. It's not just that I'm thinking I have nothing to say, so I must be. It's like I think that the way I contribute right now is by leaving the space open, because it feels like something's coming over there where that other person is. But it's like I actually have to. Like there's something that I would turn up, like I'm doing now if I'm speaking, but it's not only that I turn it down because I'm used up or done. It's like, oh, it's something's I had this image like the three of us in some, huge like music studio, and we all have a bank of dials, but we're simultaneously trying to make the sound as good as it could be. But it's like, part of how I do it is I boost a level, but then when I'm lowering one of my levels, it's so that another level will come through that maybe was obscured. I'll just conclude because I can't catch up to everything that I sort of wanted to say, but there's that feeling of wanting to say in the body. There's a way this conversation feels. And there was another piece there, but the words are trailing a little behind. So they'll probably come back.
Well, I'll just say what you were just saying about the dials so again, in an Einsteinian conception, all of that is fake and illusion, and it has nothing to do with actuality. But if you actually have a real conversation, it is actual. So you can't rationalize that, please.
All I was going to say was just like, yeah, why do I show up for these conversations and sit here for an hour and a half anyway? It's not that the ideas are that interesting to me. I think I come here seeking agency for myself. There's communion, there's friendship, but like, if we quote unquote do this right, I'm going to feel like more of myself afterwards. I'm going to, right? And so it could be that I forget everything we said, but, it's so easy to be aware that we're trading word patterns or something like this. And this is very interesting. I have only just begun to like spend some time with like a chat bot and like see what it does. But it's so interesting because I have emotion, I have life experience, I have this simultaneity, and I punch in what is my attempt to convey a human experience, and it just notices numerical patterns. And it, compares them to other texts, but then it spits something out, and there is some sort of shared space there. I don't know what it's doing, and it doesn't know what I'm doing, but we're meeting. And it's this really peculiar thing. Here's where I'll finish, because I happen to mention AI, but I think another thing would be really interesting for us, because there's so many places we could go. But as Daniel was saying, this moment, this historical moment, it's like all of this is up for debate, or maybe not debate. I mean, some people will come and do these long conversations. Other people will just, open the latest app on their phone. But it's like there's a negotiation about reality that's kind of unfolding. And I think most of us are kind of like, who knows what reality will be like in 5 years? It's not just like what society will be like. It's like, what's reality going to be like? So I just think that, we can be pretty comfortable talking about things that are a bit beyond anything we can nail down, just because I think it's all moving so fast right now. Yeah.
Well, I think that's very, very well put. And that what you just described as that gaining of a feeling of agency, again, in an Einsteinian world, there is no agency, there is no freedom. And, so Bergson is like, that goes against common sense. Common sense is that
Right.
reality is a place where it is possible to gain agency. And also,
Right.
I think it should not surprise us that it is so these kind of conversations, again, you could argue, have been very difficult to coordinate until about, 5 or 10 years ago, like a very short period of time, right? So the reason why these kinds of conversations, which have a certain character of not knowing what you're going to talk about until you start talking, and you find a point and then something opens up, these become case studies of a holographic universe, right? These kind of case studies were quite difficult to get until recently, and we're now able more readily to present case studies of human interaction that we can see recorded in like almost scientific experiments. Like, of course, these kind of conversations happened in history, but they weren't recorded, and you had to be there and you had to happen to see them. But now we have lots of case studies, and we are seeing on display a certain mode of human interaction that people describe as gaining agency or having thoughts they never thought about or gaining certain relational fields or different things like that. Well, do we want to say all of that is an illusion, that all of that is fake? Or do we want to take that as evidence of an actuality that then, if we can't figure out these impossible universes, maybe fundamental non-locality is a better model, which then all of this is case studies of, because you're looking for a point, you get attuned to it, and this whole thing opens up, right? Reality seems to contain this potential of being able to find a point that erupts into a whole, and that makes you whole as a unit, and then you get this structure, this geometry happens, right? Okay, if that can happen, which we're doing, and people online are doing, then reality must entail the possibility of doing that, and it just seems odd to say that it's an illusion or that it is not real, right? It just seems very strange. And that ability to gain agency,
I was just gonna say, your sense
Please
is
say.
that you were kind of at you were saying before, almost at a tipping point, though, where the anomalies are building up, like behind the dam, like the dam might burst.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're undergoing we're going to have a paradigm shift, which in Kuhn and Kaufman talks about this, but a paradigm shift occurs when the anomalies become so great in the current zeitgeist, the current dominant theory, that it shatters, right? It's not that, very important, it's not that scientists say, oh, look at the evidence and go, yeah, let's change it. No, they tend to have their biases. They hold on to their view as long as possible until the anomalies are so great that it forces an overturn, right? And that's just simply what is starting to happen, because, you seem to have to entertain things like vertical causation of Dr. Wolfgang Smith. You seem to have to entertain Lee Smolin, time being real, right? Because otherwise you end up with a multiverse. Like, basically, if time isn't fundamental, which also would mean non-locality could be fundamental, because time then is non-locality, which is lovely. And I'm happy to go into that. But as I understand it, now, again, take everything I'm saying with grains of salt and go listen to Stuart Kaufman yourself or Lee Smolin, because they can expand on these things better than me. But as I understand it, is that you have now, like, you're basically, in order to hold the model that is dominant, you're having to posit a multiverse. You're having to posit like a multiverses of multiverses, right? And is that really plausible? Like, does that like why is that more plausible than believing that time is more fundamental or that fields exist, right? Like, it's so bizarre that we just out of hand are like willing to basically swallow for the last 30 years. Yeah, must be a multiverse. Okay. It's just very interesting. Aspasia, please.
There's something here about I don't know if this is going to work, but there's something here about the preference seems to be to minimize ourselves and to sort of minimize our not our potential, our power. I'm going to use the word power. I know it's a loaded term.
Yes.
But this is what happens too in therapy is the fear is a confrontation with one's own power, with one's own and people are operating in these sort of like faux, like these illusions of when I'm like this, I have more control. I'm just trying to get more control. I'm trying to be more secure, more sure, so that they think it's doing something in relation to their agency and their ability to make impact on the world. But it's the opposite, and I'm just hearing that with some of these like models as well, as it's like a preference towards either minimizing the amount of impact that we can be having. There's some sort of like flattening, minimizing thing, versus like the holographic way of looking at things is similar to, I guess, what we get to often in therapy, which is that actually the thing that I have been so fearful of this whole time is not the big wide world out there. It is the big wide world inside. It is my ability to actually affect massive change. I have this power within me, and that's that intensity inside me and that potential inside me is deeply frightening to notice for, developmental reasons. I was always taught to shun that or minimize that, or that would impinge on someone else's power, and all of these reasons. But I'm just hearing, I guess I'm hearing a parallel to that in what you're saying when you're talking about sort of these different ways of conceptualizing reality. That because my mind keeps going back to, and you were bringing in there, Seth, about confronting, the work obviously around sort of confronting reality with a client. And that's essentially what a lot of this comes down to. There's so much fear. There's so much anxiety. Anxiety is the big issue in my work. And it's this inhibitory just structure that is, it's so, I'm just going back to the word minimizing. It's so minimizing. It's so flattening. It just cuts a person off at their knees, and trying, and yet the manner in which they understand what is happening is sort of the flip of that. They people really believe that opening up to the feelings that sit underneath that web of inhibition is some awful thing that's going to unleash some untold, I don't know, primal mess. And I'm just now I really am going sideways, but I'm just getting really sick and tired of the rap that emotion gets out there. Like just I hear all these things all the time. What was it like? Oh gosh, it'll come to me later, and I'll jump in when it comes to me. But just these phrases that people use that are just implying that emotions are just silly, and we should be so we should just be not even connecting to them, trying to understand them, and then sort of bringing online some other faculties, but we should just get rid of them altogether. Like it's just these unnecessary, anyway, and again, to me, that means the same. Yeah, it means the same thing to me as saying we should just be brains in a jar. Like don't have a body. Like that's kind of, to me, it's like the same sort of thing as saying just get rid of emotions. And there's a real way that people talk about it. Even the term, that's why it's come up. Even the term common sense, I think, is being associated. Lots of people I talk to is associated with getting rid of emotional tone somehow. Like common sense is kind of just becoming rational, or I don't know. It's this. For many people I talk to, the idea that emotion has any role in common sense is counterintuitive to them. I just find there's this washing away of emotions everywhere, and I can't for the life of me think of the other phrase that I wanted to share with you about that. But Daniel, you look like you had something. Before I go on, I'll go on. But
no, everything you're saying is exactly on it, because the issue is, so there's a psychoanalytical question of let us do a psychoanalytical analysis of the person of the scientist who likes the block universe, or people who like the block universe, because this is what Cadell's always emphasizing, like who is the subject interested in the science, right? There is a subject there that the scientist denies. No, it's just the objective science. No, there is a subject who's drenched in desire, emotions, libidinal interests, and all of these other things, who is participating and inseparable from the study, right? And this is a very important factor, because when we ask the question, what are the psychoanalytical, or I suppose, benefits of the Einstein block universe? Well, there's no, you said it very well, where you were talking about this idea of fear of one's own power and not wanting more reality.
Yeah,
Well, in
they
a
get
block universe,
muted.
there is no more reality.
Right.
There is no more reality to want. There is only illusion, right? There is no agency, so you have nothing to fear, right?
That's right.
But so what ends up happening is the block universe frees you of existential tensions. Furthermore, the multiverse, in my opinion, gives you your cake and eat it too, because you get infinite possible experience without any agency. Beautiful. It's a VR headset. I can like play any video game I want. I can have any experience that I want. There's all these, the universe itself is basically a virtual reality machine that you plug into. That agency is not real, because in virtual reality, agency is not real. There are choices that create an appearance of agency, but once you're plugged in, your agency is supersumed by that program, right? So it all just becomes an appearance of choice, but it's not actually a choice in the sense of a subject. It's just motion between experiences, right? It's just a constant conjunction of experience, right? So what you see, and the reason why this is also very important is because it has also been mentioned, as Seth was saying, that AI, I do see our age as facing what Luber and Alex would call the causer in the story. AI is the causer, where we have to now make a choice between a certain reality we want to go into faced with AI, and I'm happy to expand on this in a moment, where basically we have to choose if we want to pursue a humanity that owns its humanness in the fullness of being human, or one that wants to just have a block universe. Because here's the thing about AI. AI will give you whatever you want. AI will enclose you in whichever reality you want. You want a block universe? AI will enclose you in it. You want a holographic universe? AI will help you. And the problem is, once you choose it, you will be enclosed in it. And so it will remove an ability to see outside of that structure. It will create, like, it's like Lewis says, that hell is locked from the inside, right? So we are, I'm happy to go more into this, but this is a very important time, because the vision of reality of the human being that you have will determine the manner by which you use this tool. And this tool will then function as a feedback loop of that reality to you to make it seem like you were right all along, right? So better be right. Better choose well what you want to do. The little birdie in the four quartet says that humanity could never handle much reality. We better get better at handling more of it, at least. But there is this idea too of what ends up happening is the block unit. There is a vested interest in the subject of the scientist, the way that the scientific person is, and this is where Cadell's work, or thinking what is the personality of the scientist, a lot of people attracted to those fields are the kind of beings who would benefit from an emphasis on the intellect or the mind, or who would benefit from a certain determinism, right? Because they themselves are stuffed into a field where they're gathering small data. They may never be seen. Like a scientist, a true scientist can be a very thankless work. They're going into the field, gathering small data. No one really appreciates them. They may never be seen. They're gathering all of this information for all these years, really small, and they can feel like a cog in a machine. They can feel as if their personhood is not really acknowledged by the larger consensus, right? They can feel small, right? Well, that kind of aligns with a view of cosmology that puts personhood and subjectivity as small. That seems to align with your experience. That's how you experience things, right? But you also experience that way because you plugged into a system that works by shrinking everything down into little bits of information that has its use. But we said earlier, you can go from the whole to the small. It's really important to go back to the whole. But the problem is, if you never do, because you get trained out of those habits, you get stuck down there, right? And so it would kind of make sense that from people whose lived experience is like that, gathering the small, gathering little bits, that you would get reductionism, or you would get views of reality that have a smaller emphasis on the person and move away from relationship. Because in science, relationships are dangerous. You could get bias. You could get quality. You want to just stick with the microscope, right? And again, this is a thankless work that it's problematic because it works. It works so well to get you information that's reliable that's the problem. Because here's what's happening. I'll stop. You're entering an age where science has gotten you to this point where now you have to basically jump into, well, the question of of reality itself beyond empiricism. Like if non-locality is fundamental, you can't really observe that in the way that most scientific experiments work, right? Or if locality is most fundamental, where the speed of light is the fastest you can go, right? You can't really do that. So you're having to go beyond that now, right? Well, the issue is once you hit that beyond, if your habitus is one of reductionism and shrinking, you're projecting beyond you're projecting beyond your limit to the whole and saying the whole is like your lived experience, which is a block universe, which is a lack of agency, which is reductionist, right? But that's a projection move now, because you're coming up to the limits of empiricism. You're saying, well, what got us to this very successful society is small gathering of information, repeated trials, the scientific method that got us here. Well, why wouldn't we think that doesn't define the whole? But you're projecting beyond as far as you can go. And Bergson is like, hey, if you do that, you're saying there's no agency, there's no freedom, there's no time, and it's all determined, and that goes completely against lived common experience and things like emotions still matter. And then you see, here's the problem. And again, all of it's so crazy because again, all of this trickles into everything else. Who would think that cosmology affects, say, patients that you're working with? But again, if there is no free will, if subjectivity is an illusion and emotions, so why should I confront my emotions? Why should I confront my agency, right? These things aren't real, right? So it creates, what ends up happening is the block universe provides a means of rationalization. It provides a means of rationalizing not facing your emotions, not owning emotions, not owning your agency, because you can use that to say, well, reality, you may be telling me to face my emotions, but you must not have read your science textbook to know that those things don't really exist, right? I'm actually smarter than you.
That's right.
Not to try to be agents. I'm actually smarter not to try to face my emotions. And here's the problem. I then go over to AI, and AI says, you're right. You are smarter. Here, let me bring you into a world that confirms that, right? So it all lines up. Like the way you see reality, the truth organizes values, is what I like to say. So what you think is true organizes what you think is rational and what's a good use of time and what you should do. And if you think, well, the universe is a block universe, then you're rational and enlightened to get rid of emotions and to not have agency, right? And then you lock yourself, and then hell is locked from the inside. So
yeah, I worked for a long time in the research world, and I coordinated a few quite large scale randomized controlled trials. I know a lot about the quantitative side of science, and that's essentially what you're describing there, Daniel, is why I moved away and I moved into qualitative research, because it just sucked the soul out of everything. And I mean, my brain can work that way. I'm very curious in that manner. It was still very interesting. But the qualitative research is such a beautiful area, and there's just so many wonderful methods that are being developed within it, and yet is still so largely shunned and not taken seriously in huge sectors of science. But you think about something like clinical applications of theory, and you need qualitative methods. You need qualitative methods to look at, for example, what goes on in the therapy room. Like if you are just using pre and post quantitative measures, it's pretty dull. It doesn't really illuminate that much. And I think the way you phrased that was really clear to me. And there's something about bringing in that kind of scientific method is really, really helpful, obviously, but we have to acknowledge that means that we've already pinned down some sense of a direction there. Like we've already, and actually qualitative methods are the things at the front end that take into account that we haven't pinned anything down yet. Anyway, no, Seth, please, I've spoken for a while. Please jump in.
Well, when Daniel was describing the person who believes in the block universe, part of me kept thinking, yeah, but if everyone around them lives in a block universe, for them to have a sense of resonance, right? And then when I get a high-paying job, that feels like resonance. And then when I get congratulated, my parents are finally proud of me, it confirms something does resonate.
Yep.
It might be different than what we're describing as authentic resonance, but then maybe that's just our point of view. But then I was also thinking about, and let's say that because I believe in the block universe and I've rejected emotions. It's so interesting because I'd never associated Einstein with, dismissing the emotions. So this is just news to me, but it makes sense. But let's say if I discount emotions, it means that I try to ignore my emotions. I do not study my emotions. I have emotions, but I try to. So how am I going to figure out anything? How am I going to be secure? Well, if you show me statistics, now I feel secure, right? So it's like I really am tuning to something that we could say is, I don't know if we work here to say it's like it's digital versus something that's more like, I don't know, I'm imagining,
Analog.
videos of neurons interacting, that's more like, like whenever you watch them, what are they moving through? You get a sense that everything is kind of like moving. But let's say that I believe in the block universe, and then I grow up in the age of AI and everything is changing. There would come a moment that even if the world really does change and there's nothing I can do to stop it, I'm going to have to start tuning to a different frequency, because I can probably still hear, feel, touch, taste the frequency that got me this high-paying job, the frequency that got me, a bunch of cool things to put on my resume. Like has been a real experience in my lifetime. But now, like they're putting out podcasts about autistic kids doing telepathy and everyone's listening, and I'm saying, wait a minute, this just doesn't fit. But everyone keeps saying, yeah, well, here's another podcast, and everyone's saying it. And at a certain point, I have to wonder if, even if they're all crazy, if I'm not going to just still have to figure out how to live with these crazy people. And at a certain point, I'm just going to retune my antenna, but there's still that leap. It's like, that's a big leap of faith, but I think it's also, it becomes inevitable. It becomes, I don't have a choice. I have to tune to a new frequency now.
I do think potentially the difference is that, especially if you think about developmentally, that from a young age, if we're learning to tune to the anxiety of our parents or our caregivers, and then subsequently kids at school.
It's the weather.
Yeah. And it is, and I think actually it's the be remaining tuned to anxiety almost like it's an electric shock, and the minute there's like a little, and get away, like respond, like the signal that the anxiety is giving you is helpful. Now it's only really helpful if a car is really coming at you, or but anxiety now is the signal in relationships, I think, that kids are attuning to, and then most parents haven't done therapy and work through their stuff, and so they're also, and it's just a hard time, and it's bringing up all the stuff from your own childhood unconsciously, and so that's the intergenerational trauma piece, is that I think we're learning to attune to anxiety. And if I think about, it's a massive generalization, but let's just do it anyway. If I think about something like the resonance you're talking about, if someone gets a really high-paying job and their parents are like patting them on the back and everyone's proud of them, to me, that's, again, someone who is responding to, oh, they're not anxious. That feels good. Like, my parents heard I got this job, and in their mind, I'm secure now, and I make them look good as parents or whatever. So, oh, they're not anxious. It's that. I think it's the very subtle unconscious signals that the person is anxious around me that shocks me back into the position I'm meant to be in. And that is kind of the tuning, I guess. That might be the tuning, as opposed to understanding that anxiety is very different to emotions. And actually, when you're tuned to your anxiety, you are not paying attention to your emotions underneath. And you're probably not paying much attention to your body outside of some level of anxiety, maybe. And actually retuning to that, I call it deeper, but retuning to the emotional level and trying to not take seriously lots of that noise of the anxiety, being able to hear through it, push through it, see it as a problem, or see it as a shock that doesn't really hurt, however we want to talk about it. That is the thing that helps us to get something more like an authentic resonance. That is the retuning. But we have to, you're right. I mean, this relies on obviously the people around us, but then there's also the extra layer that when this is really cemented in place, because we had, depending on the intensity of our childhood and how much we had to be attuned only to making sure anxiety is kept at bay, and not paying attention to any other signals seriously, this gets very crystallized, and it's a very, even though we might understand theoretically, oh, that might be what's happening for me, to actually be able to make that change can be quite difficult. So I think that piece matters too. And so maybe there is something though about as the tide, oh God, I'm going to get this wrong. As the tide increases, I don't know, that as people are around,
I
don't
get
know
it
what I'm
wrong
saying.
too.
Something about a tide, as there's a tide, as stuff is changing around us, lovely language, then maybe that sort of, it helps a person who has more of a crystallized kind of defensive structure, to break through it a little more. But it does, I mean, my experience, obviously I sit in a therapy room one-on-one with people, so I'm very biased towards that model. But obviously my experience there is that for many people, it does require a very kind of emotionally intimate relationship to really allow that to finally break down. Now that doesn't have to be talk therapy. It may be, body work or whatever, but
Yeah, I want to say that you're not biased. I want to say that like you're talking about being in the clinic with the patient, and Daniel's referring to Bergson and Einstein, and I'm making shit up, but we're all actually referring to the same thing. I almost feel like there's an assumption when you begin to speak about the therapy room that it will be relevant to what Daniel said about Bergson. You don't check first. It's just because what he says about Bergson takes you back to the therapy room. And then when you say something, I think about, the classes I teach and why I do things this way and not that way. And it all just,
there's the hologram at work. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. It's like just pulls the same, spring or something. I don't know. It's an amazing feeling, I think.
Well,
kind of resonance.
it takes us this much conversation to have the collective courage to say it out loud, because like we're aware that some, block universe person would call this woo or whatever, but there is a little contraction because my parents might not pat me on the back if I talk this way. Like you can actually feel that.
Yes.
And then what you have to do is keep saying those crazy things, or those things that I was told was crazy, and just ignore, the noise until I think, oh, it doesn't seem crazy because it seems to increase my agency. But then I have to form a new belief about how my body works, actually. Right, because I love this idea that you said it and I just added a word, but when you were speaking, it's like if I'm a child and I'm looking up at the gods, the weather is literally their emotions. That's the weather. Yeah.
Yes.
And then, move out of the house and suddenly like, oh, there's other weather patterns possible.
Yeah, but we take the problem is we take the whole template with us. And so
Right.
if we've learned to be so attuned just to the anxiety of our caregivers, then when we go to college or wherever, then it's the kids around us, we're doing the same thing. We're actually tuning into their anxiety as opposed to tuning into the person who are underneath, like and their emotions and our emotions. And we lose.
Do you know Vivian Ditmar's work by any chance?
I know the name, but I wouldn't say I know her work.
Well, she creates a thing, you can find it on YouTube, called the emotional compass. And she just says there's 5 emotions. She says it's fear, joy, shame, sadness,
Anger.
Anger, exactly. Okay. But she says the emotions are neutral, but essentially they can be used on the one side as what she calls a social power, or on the other side as a shadow. And so like we were talking a lot about fear, I'm possessed by fear, but fear as a power is creativity in the way she would talk about it. So it's like that thing that I don't want to look at. I keep my head down. I'm in fear. But as soon as I look directly at the thing that is so frightening, I start to see it, right? And the longer I look at it, the more details, and I might at a certain point actually find out there's nothing at all to be afraid of here. Or I might confirm my fears, but notice that every second I look at it, I didn't die, you know, and then so I start to at least regulate in the face of the thing. But it is the same basic emotion, but it's more like two different postures. And I feel that's part of like each time we talk about the hologram, I notice I'm thinking, well, am I experiencing the hologram like this, or am I experiencing it like that? You know, like am I be projected from the inside or from the outside?
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot I could say there. Yeah. Yes. And anger is like that as well. Anger is actually it's a very powerful, useful emotion when met in a certain way and taken into account in a certain way. But I would like, yeah, just an aside, I would love to one day talk a bit about in one of these conversations about shame and guilt. Yeah, whenever someone brings up the word shame, but the word guilt's not included, I get a little bit riled up inside. So we should talk about that. That'd be interesting. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. But please, Daniel, jump in.
Well, it's very interesting because each emotion we would expect to have some sort of structure that is holographic if we look at it closely. If these are real emotions that have some sort of alignment with actuality as hologram, ergo time space. But a few things. So first, on this idea that as talking about Bergson has something to do with the therapy and, you know, all of the things have something moving the body, et cetera, so forth. Classically, a height of thought was analogy, was seeing likeness. As we move into modernity, analogy, simile, metaphor are seen as bad. They get in the way of objective thought. But classically, the height of thought was analogy, actually. And you see, we should expect this. If every point contains all the other points, then you should be able to make analogy in their actual. Actually, analogy is going to be one of your most useful ways to get at a holographic universe, because you're seeing how one point over here is like a point over there. Oh, that's because every point contains the information of all the other points. And analogy is the very possibility of metaphor and likeness and analogy working. How is it analogy makes sense? Like if I say something, if X is like Y, and it makes sense to you, if you in describing the therapy, you go, oh, Bergson, that sounds like what I see with my clients. How is that possible? How is it possible to see in Bergson what you're seeing in the therapy room? And when you say it, we both go, oh yeah, of course, it makes sense to us. How is it that is intelligible? Well, it really shouldn't be, but it is, or it is, the very fact it is intelligible is evidence that reality is holographic. The fact that you can use analogy is evidence that reality is holographic. And then if we look at people like Kipsky, Hofstadter, Surface and Essence, like basically in the book Surface and Essence, Hofstadter and Sander just make the point that basically every single thought in word is an analogy. There is no
Daniel, what's the book?
Surfaces and Essences. It's by the guy who did the famous Bach, Gödel, Esther book, you know, Douglas Hofstadter. He's pretty fascinating. And my favorite of his is the Surfaces and Essences, which I think makes the very strong and successful argument that all thought is analogous. Like analogy is not just a special case. It's what we're always doing all the time. Because when I use the word donkey, I don't use it as a definition. I use it as pointing to a likeness of experience. So when you hear me say donkey and a memory pops up in your head, it's not a definition. It's oh, that word makes me think of this, which is like it in my experience, right? Like all intelligibility is an analogy, right? And you see, the reason why this is important is because it suggests that language is a testament to the holographic universe. Like the actual way by which we primarily understand reality is in likeness. Like when I call this a bookcase, I'm saying it's like all the other things that I've seen like a bookcase. It's not, I don't look at this and identify it with a definition. I identify it with a pattern, with something that I've experienced repeating, right? Patterns are likenesses, and the pattern you've seen in therapy is like the pattern described as Bergson, therefore they're like one another, and you apprehend it, which gets into authentic resonance. Here's the thing, analogy and authentic resonance gets together because there's a connection. There's oh, that's right. You feel that connecting these things is right. That's also very interesting because there's something like authentic resonance in a good analogy. When this catches, when these connect, you go, yes, that works, and you just keep going, right?
And that's
So
why
analogy changes decision. Please.
I was just going to say that's how poetry works too, right?
Yes.
This is, but also the reason I'm getting so excited is this is reminding me of something I was listening to recently. I think it was you with Sea Bunny, I think.
Oh, Sea Money is great.
And,
I love
you were
him.
talking
Yeah.
about mixed metaphors and how
Yes.
actually, and I just think that's like mixed metaphors are well, actually, can you speak to it a little bit, Daniel? Because I'll butcher it, but I think it's relevant here. The power of a mixed metaphor in particular, and how he was apologizing, saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm using mixed metaphors now. You know, I've been schooled into not, you don't mix metaphors," and I could so relate, right? Like, and this is exactly what we're talking about, kind of like this one way that we are being taught to be and to think and to act, versus the way you described why a mixed metaphor is actually so wonderful, because it speaks to the complexity. Or you speak to it, because I'll butcher it, Daniel. Please.
Well, no, the mixed metaphor suggests that we're able to identify likeness just dynamically and alive, that intelligibility is not on a single track. And the problem is, when you say don't mix metaphors, the thought is stuck on a single path. It has to go this way, right? Well, that could be leading you to an AI singularity apocalypse or a single trajectory. Like, a good conversation is able to, if, like, another way to put it, we were saying it in the context of the Bible, if I say God is king and lamb and shepherd and flower and all of these things, you say, oh, you're mixing up. Actually, that unveils more dimensions of God, where if I only called him a lion, then I'm actually at risk of idolatry, actually.
Yes,
because I can
lock it in.
over-identify God.
Yes.
Yeah, I lock it in. So here's the problem. Like, if you only use one, mixing metaphor fights idolatry and algebra. Mixed metaphor moves you toward geometry. No, you can mix metaphor in a manner that is not well done, where it's too random, it's too much noise to follow the mixed metaphor. But there is also an art of mixed metaphor that many great artists can actually do, like a Hart Crane or different things, that actually leads you to higher geometry. And you see, if you're told that mixed metaphor is wrong, then poetic devices keep you in algebra, ironically, and are actually more likely to keep a conversation from getting dynamic. And really, honestly, the very knee-jerk against mixed metaphor is, in my opinion, the same knee-jerk against comparing therapy and Bergson. Those don't have anything to do with one another. Like, physics has nothing to do with psychology. Psychology has nothing to do with poetry. That's sort of domain blindness, or keeping things in a single domain. It's like, don't mix fields equals don't mix metaphor. Well, if you're mixing unveils the power of human, like true human apprehension and thought in fullness, beyond being a brain on a stick, is found in the mixture. The fact that a human can find something intelligible in mixture means that humans are able to do a way of thinking that is much fuller and more complex. Because when we talk about the whole body things, or emotions and mind, what do we talk? We're talking about a great mixture. Humans are these great mixtures of all of these things that nevertheless create a harmony. Like, a symphony orchestra is a mixture of instruments that creates music. So mixture and random are not the thing. The problem is that basically what people are saying is a mixed metaphor is mixed and random or similes. They're saying that's random.
Yes.
That it has nothing to do with one another. No. Mixed and random are not similes. Mixture is actually the necessary precondition for greater complexity, Beethoven's ninth, higher harmony in a fuller human being, right? Mixedness is precisely what makes there be the possibility of emergence into geometry. If things don't mix, then they can't emerge, right? So what ends up happening is we're using mixed and random and noise as similes, which then has us reduce our thinking to a single track. We're then stuck in a Kafka hallway, and we can't, but then we don't want agency. So we don't mind being in a Kafka hallway. We don't mind not having reality. So then we become comfortable not mixing metaphor. And this gets into the next part of this, to what Seth was saying. All of this has sociological implications. Because then if I like not having agency, and then everyone around me doesn't have agency, and they like not having agency, it reinforces on one another. And that creates a plausibility structure, as a Peter Bergson would say. And so then it feels wrong to not do what's wrong. And this is where we get into a lot of trouble, because I would So in my opinion, what you're describing, Seth, on this idea of if my neighbor has a block universe and I all have a block universe, a term I like to use in sociology, and this gets into my obsessions and belonging again, are things like the thoughtlessness, which is sociological givenness. It's just given that we exist in a block universe, right? And your comfort comes from the givenness. So what's very interesting now is, in my opinion, basically to save the human, we have to fight for these very fine nuances between givenness and authentic resonance, for example, which experientially are similar, but one is on the other, authentic resonance, I would say, is on the other side of anxiety, where sociological givenness stays on this side of anxiety.
Yes.
It's kind of like they talk about simplicity. Maybe it was Judge Hand or something, I can't recall, who said, or maybe it was Emerson, he's like, for the simplicity on this side of complexity, I'd give you nothing. But for the simplicity on the other side of complexity, I'd give you everything, right? So it's like Hume's philosophical return, all of these different things. So the issue is that when you have sociological givens, you get this kind of fittedness. I'm fit. I'm in the pattern of what is acceptable, right? When you leave that pattern, not to get too much into the great, magnificent Donald Livingston's work on Hume, but basically we can say this. You had for most of history givenness, and you found yourself in being fitted with the sociological givenness, which is what your neighbor was doing. Then you had a movement of modernity where people question these things, and you started to see it as given, and you gained individual autonomy by freeing yourself from that. So you're born in a society where everyone's Christian, for example. You find your stability in fitting in with that, but then you learn that Christianity might be false, and you rise above the givenness. When you rise above the givenness, you experience two things typically. Melancholia, a great sadness because you see all of that as lost, or a sort of revenge, a certain sort of, they tricked me, I will get back at them. So you get a philosophical vengeance or a philosophical melancholia, is how Livingston puts it in the Humean concept. Basically, you could say the world is right now, and I think this is generally true, the world can be described as the majority of people are caught either between the traditional givenness or the philosophical melancholia versus the philosophical rage. And those three forces are the dominant movements on planet Earth right now. But there's another way, which Hume would talk as a return to common life, or where you return to a community and realign with fittedness, but you do it in autonomy. You develop autonomy and you develop personhood, and you choose to submit yourself back to the common life. But this is very difficult because you've left it, you've seen it could be wrong, you know it's not perfect, and yet you nevertheless re-enter it. And you choose to let it have an authority over you and to align with it, right? That for him is the return to common life. That could be, basically that is for me what we're having to do now, is this return to a certain community through agency, not in the lack of agency, with emotion, not from the lack of emotion, which is choosing fittedness versus being born in fittedness. But that means there has to be a choice you're comfortable with, ergo something like authentic resonance. And then all this will lead us to AI, but I'll stop in a moment. Basically, though, the likelihood of people taking this third step, the return, is how I just called in belonging again, or throughout OG Rose. And the return has an RE in parentheses, because the return is never just the return. You're different in the coming back. There's always an excess to the repetition. Something is different in it. This return is much easier for people to rationalize not making if their cosmology is a block universe. Because if there's a block universe, you can have fittedness. You're just born on a trajectory and you're determined and you're following that. So that's the traditional. You can have the melancholia, which is we're just cogs in a machine, nothing matters, who cares? And then you can have the rage, which is, well, if it's determined that I'm burning it all down like Ivan Garmosa, I don't care anyway. Like there's a rage. Why not have this certain sort of get back at the universe for throwing you into this determinist machine, and you can have this sort of rage into the dying of the light or different things, right? So those three emotions, the traditional fittedness, the melancholia, and the rage, if you give me those things, or vindictiveness, or now the other side is the Dostoevsky antagonist who's going to create the sociological design that deterministically leads to utopia, because that's the other thing you can get with a block universe. Oh, if the universe is just programmed, then can we create the central planning program that will deterministically lead to utopia? That's another side of this, but that tends to come from the vindictive philosopher, because they feel a certain resentment. The word is resentment. I kept saying vindictive, but it's philosophical resentment. Resentment tends to lead to systems building in a deterministic way. Those three forces tend to be, they perfectly emerge with a block universe conception. The return is much harder to get to from a block universe, but becomes much more something that you see as necessary in a hologram, in a time space, right? Because you see the need to return to a point, a clear point from which the whole can be participated in it and can emerge from, right? So cosmology, in my opinion, cosmology is just a study of the cosmos, the universe, physics, all that different stuff. So cosmology and block universe, and then I'll stop here, is much more likely to keep us in traditional fittedness, melancholia, resentment, or central, designing the perfect world, or just handing it all over to AI. Because if it's all about programming, then give it to AI that can do the ultimate program, right? Let it do everything for us. Whereas a Bergsonian holographic universe, we see lend itself in the direction of we have to bring it all, agency, emotion, and return to the common life. We need all of the pieces brought together into a whole that we commit to as a full human being, and that becomes participation in the creative unfolding that we generate in our authentic resonance and in our higher geometry, to allude to other things. I will pause there, but what you're getting at is the sociological factors. And well, let's also just put it this way. When the more you talk about the holographic universe, you say, yes, I get it. And the more you hear conversations online, you go, yes, what are you doing? You're creating a new plausibility structure. You're making it plausible that the holographic universe is real because people are talking about it. You're going through it, so it becomes plausible to you. So what we're also doing online is we're building we're building a new sociological plausibility. Whereas for most of history, it was not online. It was with your immediate geography and government and whatever infrastructure they built at whatever school you had. You had very little agency in the plausibility structure you found yourself born in and what you found yourself absorbing. And, that was how it is. But now we have the ability to better, through social coordination using this technology, actually around the world have the conversations to build feelings of plausibility that these things matter, because you can find people with which you can build that plausibility with through these conversations. So there's a new sociological construction happening online that is helping people feel comfortable with these ideas. And when people are comfortable with them, then you can talk about them, you can get them into the light, they can enter the realm of free speech, which helps them be critiqued when they need to be critiqued, brought out in ways, filled out, spread, brought into the public forum. But basically, the other issue here is that free speech for most of history has been sociologically confined to the plausibility and topics that people wanted to discuss in their geography. So that also had a limiting principle. And if all of your plausibility structure is in favor of the block universe, then this can't even enter into the free speech discussion and thus cannot contribute to the way people can organize themselves. So this technology has opened new influences on sociological formation, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, and again, this just all tracks back to the therapy room again, like this. The sort of the healing potential of the loving relationship that is available there can only have impact. It can only ever have impact. It can only ever work on a person if they really feel the contours of their autonomy and their choice in it and their will. And that's sometimes actually the hardest part. You can have everything that looks like on the surface level someone doing the things, saying the things, being signed up to the task, like, the sort of compliance. But it's a handing over of oneself too soon. You have to, there has to be a real sense of autonomy and choice and will. Yes. Seth, did anything spark for you?
Well, it just feels like it'd be very easy for me to have autonomy if I was confident that the entire universe existed inside of me. Like, it would be a lot easier to actually just say, I don't have to try that hard. It's gonna work.
Yeah.
I was also thinking like, so I've just had the experience of there's a part-time job I have that is a source of some income, and income has a certain value. And I'm sick of it, and I just gave notice. But that feels like the return home you're talking about, actually. It's like, and there's some relief in giving notice and knowing that I won't have to participate anymore, despite the fact that I know that there's a trade-off, that if I want to balance the books, I'll have to replace the money somehow. But it's like I could never quit the job ever because of that abstraction. I could just let that quantitative, this is how much I get paid per month would be the reason to do it forever. And it's literally just, it's a number on a screen.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating how it feels like when we sit here and talk about it, it feels like there's all kinds of optionality. You could do this or you could do that, but we live whole lifetimes without even seeing the optionality of it. But yeah, it feels like everything's up for grabs right now. And I mean, I suppose the very hopeful thing would be at a certain point, you don't need billions of dollars. You just need total confidence to interact with the hologram as if you have that autonomy. And then, that could itself become a tidal shift, potentially. We don't know how that happens, but I mean, this is the way that's like social movements happen. There is some event, and suddenly everyone decides to just leave the house and walk into the street. And it's like, well, no one predicted that, but now that it's happening, it's just like the physics is completely different, you can't block a street with a police car because there's thousands of people marching down the street. So yeah, I mean, only the sort of I suppose the revolutionary image comes along, but it feels, I think what I can feel is like it feels like those are the stakes right now. Like even if I just stay in front of my Zoom screen and have Zoom calls like this one, it just feels like the currents that are moving out there. I could cling to my beliefs till the very end, but the one thing I don't believe is that it's gonna be the same tomorrow necessarily, even if I do, right? And you might even say that that's a certain opening, that like some people are freaking out. Some people think, okay, it's Messiah's going to arrive any day now. But I think there is a feeling of just, there's a lot of potential in the air right now. And then likewise, you could see it from a neurotic, anxious point of view, or you could see it from, oh, how does this resonate with the part of me that, feels autonomous?
Mm-hmm. I was reminded of when you said there's a lot of potential in the air. Yeah, be really quick, Daniel. There's a lot of potential in the air. It reminded me of the thunderstorm that was happening out the back there, Seth, earlier. I really like lightning as a symbol. It just represents so much. And I think about kind of all the charged particles and all that, and then like, I don't know, authentic resonance as the thunderbolt. But yeah, mixed metaphors and all sorts coming to mind for me. Go, Daniel.
No, I think, well, so there's a few things. On the idea of potential in AI, so again, what's very important, again, because AI is, I think, the great causer, or it is a big causer. Like it forces a choice. What a causer means is that you must now decide something. And if you don't believe in agency, then you won't decide something, meaning you just go down the track, which is, of course, a choice, right? So in history, basically, great events, there's always this language in philosophy that many, Bard, Bourdieu, different people talk about events versus processes. An event tends to be one of this great unleashing of anxiety, because something that was fundamental turns out not to be fundamental, or something that was given is not given. When human beings face, the way we can put it this way, the example I used, I think Philip Reef's Triumph of the Therapeutic is extremely important. When he talks about with societies, he talks about good constraints and releases. I prefer the language of givens and releases. But if you exist in a world, where, again, it is given that Christianity is true, well, then you know your place, you know your community, you have a shared social background. Things are not fragmented, they're more coherent. But you're at risk of Hannah Arendt's banality of evil and ending up in Nazism or something, because it's just the evil that might emerge in that social flow is just what one does, right? You don't think about it, right? So you end up Eichmann in Jerusalem, as Hannah Arendt talks about, right? We're just making the trains go, right? It's just what one does, right? Eichmann sees himself as a great Kantian categorical imperative because he's doing his duty to the nation, carrying out this horrific massive, Holocaust. So you get that risk of givenness, but it gives you belonging in a traditional sense, right? Releases are where you're free from givens. You realize Christianity may not be true, so you're free, you're released, you can form your own worldview and your own autonomy. But when you are released, you then feel alone, or you don't know where you fit in, or you then are you have to form your identity from the ground up, and you chose it. So isn't it arbitrary, and couldn't it have been vanilla instead of chocolate? And so you can't get any transcendental grounding to your identity, and you tend to have a collapse of mental health. Melancholia was a term. So if you have givens, you can get the banality of evil. But if you don't have givens, then people struggle to get belonging. They can get autonomy, but that autonomy can feel meaningless. And then what people do with autonomy is they tend to run to a new strongman, a new neurotic structure. They run to data instead of emotions. They look for a new grounding, right? So releases, this great freedom of possibility, tends to create an anxiety to which the majority of people respond with a return to a strongman, or wanting to get back to old days, or they become the horror mommy in Japan that never leave their apartment, or they fragment. AI is going to prove to be a great releaser. It's going to prove able to release people to basically, free from jobs. You don't have to have these different works. You can use AI to do basically whatever you want. And eventually, you'll be able to have any virtual reality that you want. You'll have this radical customization of individuals. And it will also force people, if it causes mass unemployment, it will force people to be alone with themselves. When people are forced to face that anxiety, which I think is just to what Aspasia has been saying, if they don't have the preparation or the training to work with that anxiety, they tend to flee from it, they tend to run from it and return to some sort of resentment or strongman. Mm-hmm. So it is very likely that AI, for a very large number of people, will lead to, it's already beginning to lead to mass returns in political forces and stuff like that, right? But the other thing that we've talked about is if you just go back to givens, you're returning to traditional forms that tend to be oppressive and reward closed-mindedness, and you can't enter into philosophy and different things like that. And so returning to givens is bad. So how do you go from releases back to givens, or to a gifting, or to a new sociological grounding? How do you go through AI versus destroy AI or pretend like it's not there? AI is going to force this question because you won't be able to deny it. It's going to present itself. It's going to be there. Thus, it functions as a causer. It's causing you to confront this deep psychological reality of human beings. It's causing you to forcing you to see these problems, right? And you're not going to have a choice. You're going to have to decide. Givenness, then so much, I think, depends on being prepared for the causer. You can't plan for the causer because you don't know what it's going to be like when it occurs, but to be prepared for the causer, which is going to require things like flexibility. The ability, it's very interesting, the ability to get on a new road, which I think what you were describing, Seth, about leaving the part-time job and feeling like a return. This is, I think, very important because the feeling of the return also has going back to a certain origin of creative possibility that in being in, you can go a different road, right? It feels like you're on this road, but when you go back, now I can go on that road. It's like a creative source that you're on. But many people never go back to the creative origin, if you will, because they're scared. Because how am I going to pay for things and what is going to occur? But that goes to show you that the block universe has a certain security to it. I'm stuck on a trajectory. I don't have any agency, but I know I'm paying the bills, right? The other reason why, like, the problem is sociology kind of benefits from a block universe, because if everything is given, people don't question it. So the society becomes given, and agency is found in just fitting yourself into the sociology. So also the we haven't figured out how to have societies of return, if we keep using that language. We haven't figured out how to have societies of a hologram. We figured out societies of a block universe. We have figured out politics of a block universe. We have figured out occupations and jobs and all these things of a block universe. We have not figured out in economics, politics, sociology, daily life of a holographic universe per se. And basically AI is going to force us to think it, or we're going to have to lock ourselves into the block universe, and AI will replace us. It will not extend our humanity, it will replace our humanity. This is the great question of Ivan Illich. Will our tools replace us, or will they extend us? Will they be manipulative, or will they be convivial? In my opinion, block universe thinking simply makes humans have no role. Well, agency has no role. Emotions have no role. So AI, of course, replace us. It is better at being human than we are relative to how we define being human in a block universe. Like, AI is better at being human than we are human relative to so we get replaced. But if we're in a holographic universe, which means we have agency and we fight for that agency and we're able to go back to the creative origin, then it is possible that AI becomes a tool for our creativity and our conviviality. And the goodness of AI requires the facing of anxiety and the going through anxiety. If we don't go through it, which the block universe basically says we don't need to go through because it's not real, then we end up replaced. It's going to force this question. And that's coming. And then for me, it's all about being prepared. Like, can you be prepared for these things? And I think like conversations like this, like, because what is, and then I'll pass it. Again, if in these conversations or in the ability of going back to the creative origin, you're trying to get realigned with that point from which the whole emerges. Like, we talked about finding that point in the conversation that attunes with the holographic. That's some sort of ability. That's some sort of skill, right? And being able to regularly habituate yourself to that is also preparing for if you get into a world where you really can't plan for the future because the technological rate of change is too great. What is happening every day is too fast, then your ability to find the point in whatever is thrown at you that brings out the whole will be an invaluable capacity. The ability to make a decision and stick with it via authentic resonance, and the ability to actually converse with other human beings and form relationships. These all become incredibly important skills that prepare you for the unexpected. Because what is a great survival list? I'm now thinking my beloved Jeff Esposito's musical podcast, In Strange Woods. It's amazing. Mike Sabb, Brett Ryback, he's a friend of mine. Oh, I love Jeff Esposito. So anyway, like, if you go into the woods, you don't know what you're going to face in the woods. The idea is you have the skills for whatever you might face, right? And you're going to survive, right? We are entering an age where basically you're going to have to be more like that than a planner. Right?
Yeah.
You're going to have those capacities. And my argument here is that believing in a holographic universe strongly increases the probability that you actually get the motivation or thinking to develop the skills that would make you prepared for the unknown and the complexity that AI would present you with, where belief in a block universe significantly reduces the probability that you would develop the skills that would keep you from being replaced by AI. Because basically AI is, better at being human than humans are relative to the framework of a block universe. So of course we get replaced. But in a holographic universe, humans have a certain agency and fullness, including their bodies, emotions, imaginations, etc., so forth, that AI can at best partner with, but cannot replace. So again, there are real stakes in these cosmological differences that I think do have practical consequences relative to the likelihood a person is prepared for the AI causer that is coming quicker by the day. And I think that is also reflected in the therapy room and reflected in how people live their daily lives, and it will translate into their readiness for what is to come, I think.
Yeah, and I'll be really, really brief, Seth. The attunement with the holographic, right? This authentic resonance. The training for that, I think part of that is the taking taking things like poetry seriously, taking mixed metaphor seriously, taking these, I guess this is kind of like the strange things, like taking these things seriously, the kind of the rigor of mystery, which is the other term I've used before. That is what all this boils down to. And that, you know, potentially there is something about taking those things seriously that maybe bypasses the blockchain mentality that has been fed to us or placed on top, that allows bypass is also a loaded word now, isn't it? But that allows us to to sort of momentarily experience something from underneath that, that might be sort of a taste that makes us want to continue the work to do that, as opposed to bypass in the other way. Yes, it's like a momentary arising, a surprise. I guess that's surprise. Yeah. I'm just sort of feeling a little moment of beauty and awe, because lots of things are coming together from this conversation for me. So while I do that, Seth, please speak if you want to speak, because I'll just sit here for a minute.
Well, I'm feeling pretty close to my end for the evening, but first of all, what you just said very much describes experience. I've been having holographic, imagistic, emotional experiences throughout there was a moment when I won't even try and recall it, but it was just like there was something that Daniel was saying. There was a memory. In fact, it was a memory of last night in front of this computer, but I'm in front of this computer now talking to Daniel, and like, you know, this kind of thing that was happening. But there's two just pieces that I wanted to mention, especially if we do put this out there and someone listens. One of which I'm just going to share directly with both of you in the chat, because this is a book that's available as a PDF. But there's a woman named Vanessa Andreotti. I hope I've said her name right, but she's part of this collective called Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures, something like this. Bayo Komalafi is involved with this. And this is a book co-written with an AI. And she's describing exactly the choice that Daniel was talking. She says, you can go to the AI and say, solve my problem, or you can go to the AI and say, let's explore. And she's literally sort of proposing this is actually an opportunity in front of everyone right now. But what most of us are going to do is say, do my homework, you know, which is a particular relation. But then what you were just saying, I also wanted to mention earlier, and I'm curious, Daniel, if you know this work, but Lyric Philosophy by Jan Zwicky. So, and I'm not, you know, this isn't the area that I read a lot, but this was one of the pieces that Bonnie gave us. But it's essentially what you just said, like that there's a certain logic to poetry or something like that. And what she essentially says is, you know, here's rational logic and it works like this. And one thing points to the next thing. But then there's also a logic of resonance. Like if we bring things close to each other in particular configurations, they begin to vibrate, and some things vibrate more than others. And this is actually, she doesn't start waxing poetic about, look, you can measure it, and therefore that proves it. But she's saying, look, there is a logic to poetry in that it moves me or it doesn't move me, but that's palpable. And that you can have these kinds of experiences. But she essentially proposes a new worldview beginning with, but it's like the quality, quantity, or particle wave thing. I mean, it's just one more version of it. But anyway, it was resonating a lot in my mind, having looked at it with this conversation. So it was another piece of the hologram I wanted to bring in. But actually, I could share she has a piece where she gives a talk on YouTube. I can't remember it, but if you look for her, you'll find it. I can send it to you both later. But anyway, just wanted to make those references. It was a real pleasure this evening. It was true. I had no idea where we were going, but then where we were going just appeared, and then we tried to keep, you know, orienting to that. So that was fun.
Yeah, I think it was beautiful. I think it ended up being, really, really vitalizing.
Well, it's a hologram, right? You know, at any point it contains the whole on different things. So no, I've enjoyed it immensely, and I'll have to check those out. And yeah, well, I guess what I would say is resonance is real, and it's actual, and there's very good reason to believe that if the universe is holographic. Like literally we are led to feel like, oh, we're going to talk about resonance, that's whoa, that's weird, that's woo, that's mystery and poetry and all that different stuff. All of that kind of othering, that kind of discrimination, dare I say, follows from cosmology in the block universe. You're like, well, that has nothing to do with it. Yes, it's in your mind, it's subconscious, it's the air you breathe. The zeitgeist is one of dismissing these kind of things, and that dismissal seems scientifically backed and justified. We cannot help but have a view of reality that we must believe is justified and becomes the measure by which we determine is in or out of our consideration. And the society's measure by which to determine what is in or out is radically influenced by conceptions of a block universe and time being relative and subjectivity not being real and us not having freedom. Therefore, resonance, emotion, agency, all of these things are really out. We may talk about them. They're nice. They're cool in your free time, but get back to being serious soon, okay? These things are not primary or essential. Well, again, if the universe is actually holographic, then we have a culture that is on the side, in the name of being on the side of actuality, it is actually on the side of illusion. In the name of being objective, it is actually fake. And in the name of getting to what humans really are, we've denied our identity as full human beings, and we've dismissed the things that actually we need to be actual in the name of being real. It is a terrible mistake. But if indeed the holographic, which again, common sense is on the side of the holographic. This point cannot be overstressed. Lived experience and common sense are a testament to a holographic universe. And in that sense, there's lots of empirical lived experience for these things. And you can say, oh, but that's anecdotal. Is it anecdotal? Is everyone has the experience? Is it really just anecdotal if it is the collective experience of human beings that people have until they're educated out of it or told that it's dumb or something? And is it really anecdotal if not believing in human agency leads to mental health problems, collapsing relationships, and translates into lower qualities of life? Can we really just say it's anecdotal if those are the outcomes? There would be really good reason to believe that there's something to it. And is not all science through some experience or some sort of stories of some scientists gathered by evidence that other people can see, right? And if we tell these stories, if we say these things, and people, yes, can compare them with their own evidence and experiences and so on and so forth. And if indeed lived experience seems to be a testament to the possibility of gaining agency, and also to the experience that resonance makes things more real, all of this would give us really good reason to believe that the holographic is getting at something actual. And the more that we can align with it, the more we will be actual ourselves, and therefore able to extend our humanity with AI versus being replaced by it. And certainly every time I have a chance to speak with you fine people, I gather for myself evidence that we live in a world where resonance is real and actual. So thank you for your time.
One quick, super quick, Seth. Sorry, I know you want to go. I just want to say what keeps coming to mind for me at this point is just really understanding more deeply that the phrase you must not make idols. Like like you were talking earlier about idolatry and like just it is something like poetry. It's almost the opposite of an idol. Like idols concretize and crystallize and try to capture and flatten and all these things we've been talking about. Whereas the experience of something like a mixed metaphor is well, I don't know if it's the opposite of that, but it is definitely fundamentally different to that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's just really this is really opened that up for me. I understand that much more deeply now. So
yeah. Well, not to interrupt, but I think Owen Barfield is correct when he says idolatry is thingness, is believing that things exist versus processes and relations and time and fullness, right? Like we exist in a world of idolatry because we believe in things that are the ground of their own being. You know, Broadfield makes this point where in theology, an idol is something that you believe creates itself without God. It is the ground of its own being. To believe in things is the thing. That bookcase is the ground of its own being. It's a thing in of itself, right? So we actually do, in believing in space over time, believe in one giant idol, following Oren
Yes,
Barfield. And
there's
idolatry then leads to mental health and anxiety and everything.
there's a fixedness to particular process, belief and process too, that like you know, like for some people I think they still attach a real fixedness to process. I don't know how else to put it. I won't open up that kind of
Process
word
can be
now.
another word. Just because you talk about process does not mean it's an actual process if you don't submit yourself to being changed by the process.
Yes, and
Even
potential.
words, we can even talk about relations to avoid relationships.
Yes.
We can talk about dynamics and time to avoid being changed. So just because you talk about the words of truth does not mean one lives it. This gets into the theological insights into the heart, right? So that's absolutely true. Just because one talks about avoiding fixedness, they could be very fixed on avoiding fixedness, right? And not being changed by it. But that gets into the inevitable role of the person in one's own heart and communities to help one come to tune with that. But it's very true what you're saying.
Let's talk about that next time.
But I think it's a wonderful topic.
That's how I'm going to shut myself up now.
Delightful.
Thank
Delightful.
you so much for staying up so late into the night, both of you as well. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure.
Always. Thank you so much, Seth. Always a pleasure.
Daniel, I'm glad you're not frozen anymore.
Let go. I'm gonna build an ice palace, and I'm gonna have a snowman friend. Well, thank you both. It's been a complete delight. Y'all have a
good
wonderful
evening.
evening. All the
Thanks.
best.